Dale Wills joins me, and you can learn what his team is up to by heading over to CentraCapitalPartners.com. That's CentraCapitalPartners.com. And we're going to be a little all over the place here because Dale's team not only does ground up construction of single family homes, multifamily, but then value add as well. So there's going to be a lot of ground here to cover over his 30 years of real estate investing experience. So thank you for joining me here today, Dale.
Jack, thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. I just told you that it's rare to have somebody in my backyard. We don't have a lot of Minnesota investors on the show.
Yeah, I think we're probably about 2 hours apart?
Yeah. So next time I'm down by the Twin Cities, I'll have to hook you up.
Yes, for sure.
So, Dale, how did you find your initial way into real estate investing? It seems like sometimes it's kind of an accidental occupation.
Yeah, for me, it's been a winding path. For a very short period, I actually physically was in construction doing the work. I did banking for a period of time. I did mortgage banking, new construction banking, development banking, worked for a large home builder, left for a period of time and owned some Radio Shack franchises.
Hmm.
And that was really pivotal for me getting back into real estate because although we had a ton of success with the Radio Shack franchises and liked it, I loved real estate. I discovered I just love everything about it. And that put me back into real estate and worked for a period of time for a company that we built a city from scratch. So we had to create our own sewer system, water company. We developed a golf course, the commercial centers, everything. And then went to work for a national developer. They asked me to move to Minnesota back in '06. And I confess I had to go to Google and figure out exactly where Minnesota was. And I said, "Yeah, I'll go for 3 years max." That was 18 and a half years ago. One thing led to another, and I said, I've worked for myself more than I've worked for others. I'm gonna go back to work for myself." We like Minnesota, and we started taking advantage at that time, a lot of the distressed assets from the '08 collapse. A lot of banks had assets, and we were working with banks, helping them with solutions to those assets, and that ran its course and then started back into development and building again.
Can you talk a little bit about the intricacies and the differences between investing in one versus the other?
In homes versus apartment complexes or something larger,
Yeah.
I think homes is a really great place to start because if you make a mistake, you've made a mistake once and you learn from it and you grow. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to do something that we're like, "Oh my gosh, I totally missed that." When you get into apartments and you do the same thing with apartments, well, now if it's a 100-unit apartment complex, you make a mistake. Well, you've now made that mistake potentially 100 times. And so homes are a really great place to start for people because what you want is a smaller scale. The risk is less. The cost, the barriers to entry is less. So it's really a great place to start. And you can start building from there to where eventually, you find a fourplex, you find a 12-unit building and you work your way up. But it is a little bit of a different game. Your exit strategies are slightly different, who your buyers are drastically different. And so there are some intricacies difference, but the fixed side is the same. The risks are the same, other than it just is multiple fold more.
Mm. Was this a planned progression, or is this something that you've learned over the past 30 years to adapt to the climate and make some changes to the business on the fly?
I think it's really, you've got to be adaptable. I'm a big believer and you'll find what you're looking for in life. And if you believe there's no opportunities, that's exactly what you're looking for. If you believe there's opportunities, that's what you're going to look for. And you're going to find either one of those. You know, he- So if you look back in '08, we had a huge amount of success and made a ton of money in 10, 11, 12, 13, when a lot of people were running scared. Um, Today, there's a lot of people that are worried, as of this recording, the interest rates are 6.5 to 7+%. We've seen the last 3 years, inflation has been 5.21% average for 3 years. And so I'm seeing a lot of people that are sitting on the sideline saying, well, let's wait and see. There's always opportunity. You've just got to be able to look for those opportunities. The opportunities that are presenting to us today are very different than the opportunities I saw 4 years ago. which were very different than the opportunities that we were dealing with 8 years ago. If there's anything I've learned, one thing is you've gotta be adaptable because there's going to be opportunities always. You've just gotta be looking for them and believe that they are there because eh, there's tons of money to be made and wealth to be built no matter what the season is.
Could you talk a little bit about your company and what is your in the current environment, what are your focus right at the moment?
So we do a lot of variety of things, as you stated. We will do redevelopments, so if there's properties that we need to tear down, redevelop an area, take a farm field and develop it. So we will go from scratch and then develop that into whatever the end product should be. We also have a construction company that we do build structures. We do rehab. So if we see an opportunity, we'll buy it, we'll rehab it. Right now, we're seeing the greatest opportunity are in entry level for sale housing. There's a huge need for housing and people will continue to buy. And if you think about a funnel, whether you're buying an apartment complex or a house, the top of that funnel is the widest. So if we're looking at houses, the people that can afford a $300,000 house at 7% versus 400, and it gets narrower and narrower. And people need houses. Well, in the apartment setting right now, so many people built apartments. We built tons of apartments across the nation, which was really helpful. And a lot of our apartments, I've got apartments that I've got interest rates as low as 2.5% on those apartments. Well, it's really hard to compete and build one today when I'm going to be at 7%. And so we're not seeing as many opportunities, although we're seeing it's coming very soon. It's coming again, and we're excited about that. However, the people that are buying their first house, whether they're paying 3% interest rate or 7% interest rate, they're excited. They want that first house and they're still going to buy. And so that's where a lot of our energies are. So, people that are looking for opportunity, we're seeing an increase in foreclosures. And so there's an opportunity to go buy houses at a discount and flip them. And if you're in that entry level, those buyers are still out there in force. They're still looking to buy.
Yeah, we're seeing the exact same thing. In fact, we're in a similar situation. That's exactly what we're doing is focusing on that first time home buyer in that market. That seems like what has actually happened is that, like you said, the top of the funnel, those buyers that would have been looking for a more expensive house have just moved down the funnel a little bit, looking at something a little more realistic because of the interest rates. The buyer pool there is likely increased in that buying.
3 years ago, I was able to afford a 450, $500,000 house, and now I can only afford 300,000. My income didn't change, but the interest rates and inflation is what's killed us.
So, how are you acquiring these properties at the moment?
So for us, we don't do currently, we don't do small scale. So we don't buy individual houses. We're buying larger apartment complexes and large tracts of land or redevelopment opportunities. So most of what we're currently doing is either we do a lot with cities. So cities that own a parcel that they want to redevelop and they ask us to come in and give a proposal, soliciting deals, people that have land and asking if they're interested in selling, the broker community, just because we're here and we know it. Somebody that's wanting to get into it, the best way is just to knock doors, sending letters, say, I'm interested in your property. If you're looking at individual houses, watching the foreclosure notices, just being really proactive. Our experience is we don't find a lot of deals that have been shown to the public. And so you want to get into the deals earlier on. Once everybody knows about it's on the internet, it's usually because it's overpriced.
Mhm. How are you, finding out these in advance, making relationship with the local brokers?
Yeah, so yeah, part of it is having relationships with brokers that are in the arena in which we're targeting, and so they call us first, they think about us before they'll throw it up to the general public, and then building relationships with people that own assets that we would like to buy. And so having, similar to a real estate, we've all received these, a real estate agent that'll have a letter writing campaign, "If you wanna list your house, call me." And if they continue to farm that group of people, eventually I want to sell my house. Well, unless I have a friend or a relative that's in it, I'm likely going to call them. We identify what are assets we want to buy and have a continued campaign. So when they're ready to sell, they think about us first.
Mhm. Earlier, you made a mention that you had taken some action when people were running scared and really took advantage of this. This is kind of an old adage of being ready when the opportunity strikes or running in the opposite direction everybody else is panicking from. Can you talk a little bit about that? What caused that type of mindset and how you've implemented that in your business and your culture?
I think we all have belief systems, and those belief systems can either strengthen us or weaken us. Early on in my career, I had a belief system that I wasn't as smart as everybody else and I wasn't as educated, and that belief system in many ways has served me very well because I can't compete with these people that have MBAs and all of this experience, and so I've got to figure out how to pull it off. You know, in 2008, the market collapsed. Many people in our industry were losing their jobs. I decided I wanted to leave the national company I was working for, but it's like, nobody's gonna hire me because a lot of these people I'm competing for those same jobs have advanced degrees, have many years of experience in these resumes. And so my belief system was, I've got to go figure this out on my own. I've got to go do this. And I don't know if that was true, but I'm really grateful today I believed it because I love working for myself. And so that really set a tone earlier on back in 1993, 94. It set a tone having those beliefs because it told me I've just got to go figure it out. I've got to make things work. I've got to get creative. And so it served me really well. You know, whether or not any of that was true, it served me well because now we're having great success as a result.
Mhm. Well, how big is your team now, and what are you focused on versus everybody else?
We're a really lean team. We contract out as much as we possibly can. You know, we'll hire consultants for engineering, we hire consultants for architectural work, we hire consultants to build. You know, we don't physically build anything, but we direct it and hire the subcontractors. So right now, I think we're running at about 20, 22 W-2 employees currently.
Oh, it's still a fairly large company, really, when you say lean, but everybody must have their purpose.
That's exactly right. Be really intentional with everything you do and keep the resources precious.
Yeah. So, there we have a lot of people because of the environmental situation, the economy the way it is, there's a lot of people who procrastinate when it comes to getting into the real estate investing, and they might be sitting on that initial funds for investment, or they're trying to decide on where to start. What would you say, where should somebody start? What should they consider right now as they're sitting on the sideline?
People that are sitting on the sideline, I want you to think about in the 1960s, interest rates were really low. In the 70s, they went up and they continue to go up in the early 80s. And then in the early 90s, they went down again. And you think about all those people in the early 70s that said, I'm going to wait for interest rates to come down. They lost out on 2 decades of wealth building. And I think there's some similar parallels to what we're dealing with now. I see people that are saying, oh, interest rates are so high, I'm going to wait for them to come down. Don't do it because go find deals. There are deals all the time. There are deals. Go find them. Have a mindset that you're going to find them and you will find them. And if I can make a deal work at 7% and interest rates go down, guess what? I'm making a ton of money now on that same deal if I can refinance it to 3%. We may or may not ever go to 3%. I don't really know. And just as likely, I don't know if we're going to go to 12%. Either one of those could happen. What I know is I focus on what I'm really good at, and that is go out and find deals that make sense. If you find a deal that makes sense at 7, it's going to be even better at 3. If you find a deal that makes sense at 7 and they go up to interest rates go up to 12, well, you've got a really solid asset now that you can hold on to that's going to create cash flow. And so I just do it. Just go and make things happen. Go make money. Otherwise, you're gonna be like the people in the '60s that sat and waited 2 decades, and next thing they know, life is ready for retirement, and I didn't make anything.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting time, especially the way you laid things out. I mean, with the higher interest rates, we are seeing kind of a slowing of the appreciation of the real estate. So it's kind of counteracting each other to a certain extent. And like you said, acquiring something now when the prices might be a little deflated, you're more likely to win in the end. Just
So you're competing with less people because there are so many people that are waiting for whatever they think is gonna change, which means there's more opportunities for those of us that are still playing the game.
right. So just to remind everybody, head over to centracapitalpartners.com. That's centracapitalpartners.com. There's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a quick like and subscribe. So, Dale, knowing all of this, do you run any kind of syndications or anything regarding any of your projects?
We actually just started this year,
Mm.
about 9 months ago, that we decided we'd let people co-invest. Historically, we've used internal cash, debt financing from local and regional banks, and then every once in a while bringing in a single partner. And we decided we wanted to expand it initially to help our employees to build wealth, and ultimately said, "Well, let's just anybody that wants to join in." And so, yeah, we've created funds that people can co-invest in deals that we do. And on any given day, it depends on the moment you go look on what deals we actually have that we're looking for funds.
What has been your biggest challenge regarding that process?
Raising funds, I don't know if it would be a big challenge, but it's new. We're really good at development. We're really good at construction. We're really good at identifying real estate opportunities, and going out and raising capital has not been something we've done. So it's been a fun adventure to learn that part of the business. Having a banking background has helped me quite a bit. And so, it hasn't been challenging, but we're learning. We're constantly learning that process and how to identify the right investors and bringing them in.
How do you identify the right project? Are you focused on any particular market? You staying in Minnesota?
We are expanding out of the state. Historically, it's been we identify a geographic area and stay in that. And so if somebody comes in and says, I've got a project and it's not in that geographic area, it doesn't matter. We say no. But we've been working and positioning ourselves the last year to go into other markets because you'll never find what you're looking for if you don't know what it is that you're looking for. So I think it's important that you define what is the geographic area? What is the how much money am I willing to invest? What is the product type? What is my end goal with this product, I think is really important. For us, we do have that all detailed out of where are we willing to go, what product types are we willing to go, what size deals. As example, we won't do a deal that has less than 20 units. That's an example for us. That's not always been true. So that does evolve for you through time. I think it's really important you define that, and we're in a stage that that's evolving for us a little bit because we're in the early stages of doing some new adventures in markets that we're not currently in.
With as many projects as you have going on, can you talk a little bit to how you manage all of this, the project aspect from beginning to end?
So we've got a really great team. We have a team that's just focused on land. And so that land team, they identify projects to buy, they do the acquisition, the purchasing of it. They do if there's any entitlements to be done, meaning working with the cities, the counties to get approvals. They work with engineers for designing. They do the actual development. So tearing down buildings, putting in the roads, putting in the underground pipe. We have another team that does purchasing, and so they identify contractors that are gonna work with us, and they qualify them and get contracted with them. And then we have a construction management team that they're then managing all of those contractors to do the work and scheduling it. We have an accounting team that makes sure we're paying our bills and the money is flowing. And then Sentra Capital Partners, the newer entity, we've got a team there that is managing the capital raises. Each team has very specific tasks. We've got very specific core processes and what each team's responsible for and how they hand it off to the next one, which helps them to stay leaner and more efficient. My all of my time and energy is on the vision of the company, building relationships and structuring that vision and getting the team behind it to execute it.
As you've been scaling, what do you do to make sure that you're hiring the right people for these?
That's really one of the hardest things. So we actually have a process, a core process that we go through step by step. And some of the critical things are we have core values. We have 5 core values. And anytime we hire somebody, I spend a couple of hours with them their first day on the job. It's interesting how often when I talk to our core values and our process, they'll be like, "Oh, that makes sense now. Your hiring process is a little bit strange." Because by the time I interview anybody, I'm not looking at if it's an accounting position, I'm not looking at whether or not you know how to do accounting because somebody else has already qualified you for that if you've gotten to me. I'm totally looking at, are you gonna be a core value fit? Are you going to live and breathe our core values? And am I gonna show up to work and go, "Oh my gosh, Jack's here today. This is great." Or is it like, "Oh crap. How do I avoid Jack?" That's not healthy. And so that's I put a lot of focus there. And then we have a couple of assessments that we do that help us to see if they're a fit. So they're not assessments like, are you smart or not, as much as they're assessments on personality. A really good example of an assessment. According to this assessment, I have a one communication style. What that means is not that I'm a bad communicator. It means that if you get an email from me, it's probably really short. Whereas somebody with a 10 communication style, it might be a paragraph. Thank you so much for doing this. We appreciate. Whereas mine might just be thank you. Well, my
Mm.
assistant is a 7 communication style. Well, what that tells me is when I show up on Monday, my habit is put my head down, get to work, and go. Whereas for her, it's she wants to know, how am I doing? Am I doing okay? How is my weekend? And one's not right or wrong, but what's important for me to know that as I go in and when I see her, I say, "Hey, how are you doing, Krista? It's good to see you." And I do genuinely care about her, but I forget that step. And so those things are really helpful. So we do that, and then we have a really specific onboarding process for the first 30 days of what we do with that person to make sure that they're a good fit and they understand our expectations, that it's pretty spelled out their first 30 days of what they're doing each day and who they're meeting with and what their objectives are.
Right. One of the things that seems to be a recurring item here as we've been talking is your focus on processes. Is that something that you recognized and incorporated early on? Or is that something that you had to kind of get things documented and was it something you had to force yourself into?
No, that for me, it comes pretty natural. Now, our processes evolve all the time. And we're right now revamping some of our processes on the construction team. For me, I'm naturally drawn to efficiencies. How do I become more efficient? How do I make sure that all of my action items are in a single place, that my calendar is being managed in a single place? Those types of things. That is a natural for me. It comes easy, it comes natural, which then means the next step is, well, how do you create processes for everybody to keep things efficient? And it's how you can replicate the systems over and over with those processes.
Mhm. So do you enable your team members to make sure that they're updating these processes with this documentation?
Yeah, we have different processes, and so somebody owns every process within the company. Somebody has ownership for that, keeping it updated, because processes change depending on what the climate is, what we're doing, what our objectives are. So somebody owns each process. So if we need to update them, they're responsible for updating. They're responsible for making sure everybody that's involved in it signs off on it, and then they're responsible to make sure everybody is trained on it and knows how to execute on that process.
Where do you keep these documents and everything written down? So and is everybody used to going to the documents, finding the answer first before they start emailing you?
That's theoretically, not always is it executed that way. That's the theory is go to those core processes. So we have a single place that all the core processes are stored, and then we also have SOPs. So an example might be in accounting. The core process is we pay all of our vendors on the 1st and 15th of the month. Now an SOP would be, okay, this is how you log into the software. This is where you click to pay invoices. This is how you put the data in for the invoices. This is where you put the amount. That would be an SOP, whereas a core process is more of the higher level. We pay on the 1st and 15th of every month. But all of that is in a single location. Here is all the core processes. And then here are all the SOPs that link to those core processes with the intent of everybody should be able to readily find them and be able to find the answers. And then we're constantly looking at when we have meetings, if we have an issue we're trying to solve for, is there a core process that needs to be revised or created to address this problem for the future?
As you scaled your company, was there a tipping point where something like a light bulb moment where something changed that really allowed your business to take off?
For me, it's been a very slow building incremental process of continual learning, continual growth. I've heard the saying, if you work hard enough and long enough, eventually you'll become an overnight success.
Mhm.
And I think that's true for all of us. We might all of a sudden go from doing a small amount to doubling and tripling it. But more often than not, it's what is that work that you put in to get to that point? How did you get to that point? I rarely see somebody that's an overnight success. Mostly it's they've worked really hard and long to get the skills and the knowledge and the experience and the connections to get them where they are. And that I found has been my experience. I definitely don't have the skill set of get rich quick overnight kind of a guy. It's been a slow incremental process for me. And most of the people I know that are wealthy, that would be true for them as well.
Sure. The reason I asked too is the concept that it seems like, early on, a lot of people are going to hold on to the processes as much as possible. They try to do as much as they can on their own. And there's a point where there's a big mindset shift where you hire that first person and you
Yes.
you see them as an investment them, and that is an investment versus an expense. Does that make sense?
Yes. There's a book called Who Not How. Ben Hardy, Dan Sullivan wrote it. And the concept is exactly what it is in the title. And so often we think about how we're going to get something done. We get into the technical versus really it's find the who, find the expert. That's part of how we stay lean is instead of us trying to learn how to design the subdivision, let's go hire an expert. Yes, we're going to sign off on it, but let's hire an expert that can figure out how to land plan this. Let's hire an expert. And that really slowed my growth early on is I wanted to do everything just like you said. And I think that we all have that. They're too expensive. And there's a point, that yes, you've gotta do it yourself because you don't have the capital, and then there's a point where it's like, "Okay, if I really wanna grow, I've gotta start letting go of some of this and letting the experts do it."
Head over to centracapitalpartners.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. Dale, before we jump into the rapid fire questions and start closing out this episode, is there a question or concept you wish we would have tried to cover here today?
I think the biggest thing is you become the average of your 5 closest friends, and so I want you to think about where do you wanna be 10 and 20 years from now, and how many of those friends are there? And if you tell me 1 or more, then I'm gonna tell you your dreams aren't big enough, unless you're really operating big. But if you're early on in this, you don't have big dreams and having people around you. So what do you have to do? You've got to surround yourself with knowledge and create that artificially. This podcast is a perfect example. There's some really smart people that are on this podcast that as you listen to this podcast, that becomes your 5 closest friends. That is how you're gonna change your mindset. Because if you are excited about real estate, you're excited about making a lot of money, find people through podcasts, reading books, different things like that, that are gonna help reinforce, yes, go get super rich.
Mhm. You're letting the secret out of the bag. The reason I host this show, and you notice there isn't any sponsorships or I don't do any of that, is because that's the value I place on talking to people like you, Dale. This is one of my 5 people that I hang out with.
Yeah, I mean, you're a different man today than when you did your first podcast, there's no doubt.
Right. Well, Dale, if you're ready, we'll jump into the rapid fire questions. So, first of all, what lie do real estate investors sometimes tell themselves?
I don't think we consciously tell ourselves this, but I think we subconsciously believe that we know it all. And I think it's super important we stay humble and hungry. Things are changing and there's always things to learn and to know. So don't get caught up in I know what I need to know and put blinders on.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Take bigger risks. Go for it. Don't hesitate. Make it happen because you can lose it all and start all over again.
Do you have a book recommendation?
I love reading. I read 50 to 60 books a year, and it's really hard to answer that because it depends on what stage of life. But one of my favorites is he's the original Rich Dad Poor Dad. Keith Cunningham wrote a book called The Road Less Stupid. Robert Kiyosaki actually studied under Keith, and The Road Less Stupid is just full of gems of business and life advice that he goes through. Keith is a good friend, a brilliant mind, and I love his book.
That's interesting.
It's not, he's probably sold a couple 100,000, but it's surprisingly the quality of the book is surprisingly that it's not wider known.
Sure. What single strategy, process, or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time saving impact to you or your business?
I would say it's not only time saving, but it's also money saving. This principle I learned from Keith as well, from Keith Cunningham. And he has a similar philosophy. We do it a little bit different in our company. Anytime we go buy an asset, we talk about it and then I'll split the room randomly. They don't know where they're going to be put. I'll say, Jack, I need you to argue why we should buy this, and I need somebody else to argue why we shouldn't. If you can't articulate why we should buy that asset and give a compelling argument, and equally why we shouldn't, we don't do the deal. Because often when we do things, we we're too optimistic. We see all the rose colored glasses reasons we should do the deal, but we don't see the reason why not. Every deal has risks, no matter what it is. Whatever you're doing, there's risks. You're sacrificing something. So we go through that process and it's, can I live? Is the upside worth living with the downside? So if the negative comes, can I live with that? And if the answer is no, we don't do the deal.
I really like that approach. That's something that I just want to call out, and everybody should make note of that one. Dale,
Yeah.
this has been fantastic. Once again, you could learn more what his team is up to by heading over to centracapitalpartners.com. Centracapitalpartners.com. I really appreciate your time here today. This was great.
Jack, thanks for having me.